Johnny, Joey, Dee Dee, and Tommy. 4 rough kids from Queens, New York who accidentally invented punk rock. Or did they? Punk rock came along like a savior for people who were looking for something in the era that followed the end of the 1960s counterculture. It was loud, it was wild, and it could be both heavily apathetic as well as deeply empathetic. But where did it all begin, and who were the ones who started it? Welcome back, friends, to the Raised by Hippies YouTube channel, where we dig into the people, places, and cultural influences that made up music in the 20th century and beyond. If you dig this kind of thing, don't forget to throw me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment letting me know what your thoughts are on this discussion, and what your favorite Ramones song is. Mine is Beat on the Brat, I'm not gonna lie. Now let's hop back to the mid-70s when it all started, take a closer look at the band who made it all happen, and look at how the genre developed as it moved into other geographic locations. And finally, we'll try to get to the bottom of the great debate. Was punk really invented by the Ramones? John Cummings was born in 1948, the son of parents with Polish and Irish roots. He grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, where the post-war grit of New York was everywhere. Motorcycles roared down the streets, gangs patrolled the corners, and the discipline of working-class life shaped young men to be tough. Johnny absorbed it all. He carried himself like a soldier with a strictness that was rare among the free-spirited hippie kids around him. While others dreamed of freedom and peace, Johnny was driven towards order and control. Music grabbed his attention early, but for him, it wasn't about glamour. It was about power, structure, and focus. These qualities would later make him a controversial figure in the band, respected for his work ethic, but often difficult to get along with for his uncompromising toughness. Tamás Erdős, born in 1949 in Budapest, Hungary, grew up under the shadow of a not-so-ancient history. His parents were Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, and the trauma of that era lingered over his family. When the Hungarian Revolution erupted in 1956 and the Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest, the Erdős made the dangerous choice to flee. They arrived in New York as refugees, leaving behind their homeland for a shot at survival and freedom. Settling in Queens, Tommy grew up as a quiet observer, more thoughtful and musically inclined than his peers. He was fascinated by the mechanics of music, how songs were put together, how production shaped sound. And though he would become the first drummer of the Ramones, he never saw himself as a performer. His passion lay behind the scenes, guiding and shaping, his immigrant past giving him a grounded perspective that the others often lacked. Jeffrey Hyman came along in 1951, born in the same Queens neighborhood but carrying his own struggles. Tall, thin, and awkward, Jeffrey was different from the start. He suffered from Marfan syndrome, which left him with a frail, gangly frame, and battled obsessive-compulsive disorder and anxiety that often made daily life overwhelming. At school, he was teased and bullied for being odd, yet he retreated into music as a kind of sanctuary. He loved the Beatles, he loved girl groups, and the lush productions of Phil Spector. He started singing and drumming in local bands, finding that he fit in among musicians more than anywhere else. Despite his shyness, there was a fierce energy in him, a sense that music could carry him somewhere beyond the pain of being an outsider. And later, as Joey Ramone, that awkwardness would become his greatest strength. It's what made him interesting, both visually and personally, not to mention a voice and a presence unlike anybody else. Douglas Colvin, also born in 1951, lived a childhood that was almost the opposite of his bandmates. Born in Virginia but raised in West Berlin, he grew up amid the wreckage and tension of post-war Europe. His father, an American soldier, was often abusive, while his mother, a German war bride, struggled to keep their family together. Dee Dee's early years were defined by military bases, a broken home, and instability. He felt the weight of displacement and carried with him both a German accent and a restless energy that set him apart when he finally returned to the United States in 1968. That rough upbringing forged in him something unpredictable, impulsive, and brutally honest, channeling anger and instability into blunt, fast bursts of creativity. He'd become Dee Dee Ramone, the most volatile, but perhaps the most essential spark of the group. Johnny and Dee Dee first connected in Forest Hills in 1974. Johnny's disciplined guitar style, influenced by The Who and The Kinks, met Dee Dee's restless energy, shaped by his turbulent childhood. Dee Dee was the first to take the name Ramone, inspired by Paul McCartney's early pseudonym Paul Ramone, and soon convinced Johnny to adopt the name Ramone as a surname as well. Together, they began hammering out short, fast riffs and basements, experimenting with a stripped-down sound. Jeffrey Hyman joined initially as a drummer, changing his name to Joey, but was soon moved to vocals at the urging of Tommy, who'd been advising the band for a while, a friend of Johnny and Dee Dee's. And Tommy stepped in on drums.
Because we don't believe in indulgences or excesses. We try to keep things as trim as possible. Well, we've been friends since junior high school. We've known each other for over 10 years now. And about 2 years ago, we were sitting around listening to the radio. We were hearing the type of music we used to like, those short songs, the poppy songs. And we decided to put together a band that plays that type of music. And what we did was we combined the feel of those pop songs with hard rock.
By 1974, the band had solidified the classic Ramones lineup. Joey on vocals, Johnny on guitar, Dee Dee on bass, and Tommy on drums. They rehearsed relentlessly in Queens, and in August of that year, they carried this sound downtown to CBGB's, where they played their first show, 12 minutes, establishing the foundation for what would become New York punk. If the CBGB scene is something that interests you, we just made a full-length documentary about the venue and the bands who first got their start there over on my Patreon account, where if you sign up for the top tier, you get access to all the documentaries that we've made so far. Our own personal VH1 where you get to vote on the subjects. Check it out through the link in our bio. Now back to New York. Before the Ramones, the seeds of punk rock were already scattered across the rock landscape. In Detroit, MC5 had forged a sound that was loud, fast, and political. Their first recordings pulsed with anger, and their live shows were chaotic rituals. They treated the stage like a battleground, a place to release frustration and challenge the audience. For young musicians in New York City, that energy was impossible to ignore. Johnny, Dee Dee, and Tommy all cited the raw intensity of the MC5 as proof that rock could be intellectual and violent at the same time. The Stooges, also a Michigan band, led by the iconic Iggy Pop, offered a template of minimalism and aggression. Iggy's guttural vocals and confrontational presence created a sense that performance and personality could be inseparable. Their songs were built on simple, repeating riffs, often circling a single chord for a minute, yet the effect was hypnotic. The Ramones absorbed this idea and pushed it further, speeding up the tempos and cutting away anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Joey in particular was drawn to Iggy's detachment and unpredictability, translating it into his own awkward, magnetic stage persona. And let's not forget Death. Formed in Detroit in the early 1970s, they brought raw, fast-paced aggression and socially conscious lyrics. Their uncompromising sound blended garage rock energy with confrontational edge, helping lay the groundwork for punk's DIY ethos and cultural rebellion. Closer to home, the New York Dolls provided a very different kind of influence. Their look was flamboyant, intentionally trashy, borrowed from glam and early rock theatrics, and their music was raw and unpolished. Dee Dee and Tommy admired the way that the Dolls embraced style and attitude, turning roughness into a deliberate statement. Johnny found the band's energy and disregard for musical polish resonated with him. The Dolls made it clear that rock could be chaotic, fun, and dangerous. And the Ramones took that lesson and applied it to a stripped-down, faster format. The Velvet Underground cast a long shadow as well. Their recordings in the late 1960s were stark, often repetitive, and carried a sense of urban alienation. Lou Reed's lyrical detachment and the band's willingness to dwell on the mundane gave the Ramones a blueprint for channeling frustration without excess. Dee Dee later said that the Velvets showed that songs could be short and simple, yet carry emotional weight. Tommy was interested in how the Velvets structured repetition to create tension, a technique that would shape the Ramones' early arrangements. Other proto-punk bands like the Dictators and the number of obscure bands playing CBGBs among other downtown venues also left their mark. These groups were combining street-smart lyrics, sarcasm, and a willingness to disregard virtuosity. No killer guitar solos in these tracks. For the Ramones, these bands proved that talent alone did not define rock and roll. Attitude, timing, and chemistry could matter just as much. They absorbed this collection of lessons, repetition, aggression, and stage presence, then distilled them into songs that rarely exceeded 2 minutes and completely disregarded showy techniques. By the early 70s, the Ramones had a clear idea of how they wanted their music to sound. They were able to compress all of these ideas into a consistent, repeatable formula. By the time they discovered CBGBs, the Ramones were prepared to take these lessons and apply them in front of an audience, setting the stage for a new chapter in rock history. CBGBs, a small club in the Bowery run by a misfit named Hilly Crystal, had begun booking unpolished local bands alongside poets and art rock acts. The Ramones' first performance there, August 16th, 1974. The set was chaotic and loud, but it captured the raw immediacy that the band had been refining in Queens. The word spread quickly. CBGBs became their home base, a laboratory for testing songs and honing the speed and precision that would define punk rock. Other downtown acts, including Television, Talking Heads, Patti Smith, and Blondie, opened for the Ramones and shared their stage, creating a scene that was vibrant, confrontational, and unmistakably New York. By 1976, the Ramones had recorded their debut album, a self-titled collection of short, relentless songs. The record was recorded very quickly, very little studio polish, capturing the band as they would have sounded live. Each track lasted barely 2 minutes. Lyrics were simple and often humorous. The minimalism of the album was kind of radical for the time. Critics and fans quickly recognized that something new was emerging here. The release of the album coincided with the band's first tour of England in 1976. London audiences were electrified by the Ramones' relentless velocity and stripped-down style. Bands like the Sex Pistols, The Clash, and The Damned later acknowledged the Ramones as a direct influence. Malcolm McLaren, the former manager of the New York Dolls, who had returned to London as well, observed this emerging New York scene. He took cues from the Ramones' image and the CBGB's energy to shape the Sex Pistols into something more than a band. They were a cultural statement.
Kids realised that whether they liked the Sex Pistols or not at the time, it didn't matter, and sooner or later they found the Sex Pistols a very meaningful band because of what they were doing, because of lyrically what they were saying.
Malcolm McLaren encouraged the Sex Pistols to adopt confrontational postures, aggressive tempos, and minimalist song structures, all of which echoed the Ramones' approach. British fans marveled at the speed and the simplicity of the songs, which contrasted sharply with the more theatrical glam rock of the local acts of the time. And many of those fans were mistaken in thinking that punk actually started in London, due to the explosive nature of songs like Anarchy in the UK.
Before any of the English groups put out an album, we're already up to our third album.
Right.
By the time anyone like this first Sex Pistols album came out or something like that.
There are a lot of people who think that the UK music scene influenced the American thing.
We're aware of that.
While punk would continue to evolve in multiple directions, from hardcore to post-punk, the Ramones' early work remained the most direct and accessible blueprint for the genre. It's impossible to not acknowledge the way that punk rock changed when it went to the UK. The London punks identified with the discomfort and the anger of the New Yorkers, but something was different here. The media was interested in these new bands that were taking the country's underground by storm, in a way that American media hadn't been. And as a result, the genre blew up in a more meaningful way. New Yorkers may have created punk, but the British intensified it and brought it into the mainstream. And as a result of the success of bands like the Sex Pistols and The Clash, the definition of punk changed.
It's now about 2 years since you formed, since it all began to happen. Do you think something has been achieved in those 2 years? Can you look back and say you've achieved something, Nick?
There's a hell of a lot been achieved, yeah. Well, it's a lot easier now than it used to be to get a band together.
We can play our guitars.
Better bands, right?
But do you think now that the companies have signed up bands and do you think it's not... There was an anti-business thing at one time, isn't it now just the business again?
Yeah, it's all a business.
Doesn't that shock you that you wanted to destroy it and now it still is a business?
Yeah, but we signed up with them, you know. We weren't going to go into no hippie thing where like you stay in one corner of the world and no one ever hears about you. And if you want to come out of that corner, you've got to deal with the real world, and that's business, you know. And if you think it isn't, then you're just fooling yourself.
It's not achieving anything, it's just digression. They play rock and roll at airports. That's about as like advanced as it can possibly get. It's too much like a structure, a church,
yeah, but there was
a religion, a farce.
A time when you did not feel that way. What made you change?
No, I've always felt this way. Because the Sex Pistols was going to be the absolute end of rock and roll, which I thought it was. Unfortunately, the majority of the public, being the senile animals that they are, got that wrong. Too bad.
And American record labels suddenly started to take notice of the little club in the Bowery where it all started.
I guess we're just interested to see what's going on. We saw a bit in, I think it was New Yorker, and more or less thought was see what was happening.
It's a fascinating place, I must say. It's probably one of the most interesting places in New York. Just simply the neon lights and the crowd here. It's all very interesting.
Would you come here again?
No. Doesn't interest me in the least.
Soon the Ramones started touring around the rest of North America. California was a test of both endurance and influence. The Ramones played clubs like the Whiskey A Go-Go in LA, bringing the speed and minimalism of New York to audiences who were accustomed to polished, arena-ready rock, dominating the West Coast at the time. And while the Ramones never really achieved mainstream success in California, their shows made a deep impression on local musicians there. Bands like The Germs, X, Black Flag, and the Dead Kennedys in San Francisco witnessed the intensity and simplicity of the Ramones firsthand and absorbed it into their own music, setting the stage for what would become the Southern California punk explosion.
As you may notice, America produces a great many people who have no outlet for their emotions until they commit some really creative, well-planned crime. What makes these people's brains tick, and whose fault is it? Is it theirs or is it society's? I think it's society's.
What would you say to the people who might say that you were rather tasteless, your critics? What would you say to them?
As I say,
do you think a time will come when music like Black Flags will be more widely accepted than it is today and maybe dominate the airwaves?
No, I mean, you see what gets on radio now, you see what appeals to the masses. It's very plastic, inhuman, distant, cold music. It appeals to people who don't want to listen too hard, you know? That'll always be the most popular thing. There's no home for a band like Black Flag.
And the genre continued to spread. The Ramones' impact extended beyond California. They traveled up the coast to Washington, D.C. and other cities and exposed young bands to a new blueprint for rock music. There was something about this that really brought people together and encouraged the misfits to come out of hiding, even if it was just their mutual anger and discontentment with society. Even where the Ramones did not achieve commercial breakthroughs, their tours planted seeds that would grow into entire regional scenes. Their visits inspired local bands to form, to speed up their tempos, and to strip their music to the essentials. The influence of seeing live Ramones shows reverberated for years, shaping how punk evolved on the West Coast and in cities across America. At the same time, the band was facing the challenge of remaining relevant in a rapidly evolving environment that was increasingly fragmented. Tommy Ramone made the decision to leave the band in 1978 after becoming exhausted from the touring lifestyle, retreating to the studio, and was replaced by Marky Ramone, who joined as the band's new drummer. Punk in California was taking on a more aggressive, confrontational edge. The Ramones' clean, high-speed aesthetic contrasted with the raw brutality and political urgency developing in hardcore. Yet even as the scenes diverged, the Ramones remained a touchstone, a reference point for musicians trying to understand what punk could be. The Ramones are often referred to as the founders of punk rock, even if they weren't the original ones who actually invented the styles. More than any other band, they captured the vibe and the feeling that defined punk rock. Fast, raw, irreverent, and stripped to the bone. Their shows and records became a blueprint for every other punk band, who would either try to imitate, adapt to, or rebel against the Ramones' music. From London to Los Angeles, the Ramones weren't just an influence, they were the spark that set entire scenes on fire. Punk rock itself was born as a reaction, a response to the collapse of the 60s dream and the excesses that followed. The decade had given us groundbreaking music, but by the early 70s, the counterculture had imploded. Rock stars overdosing left and right, movements splintering, and the optimism of Woodstock had given away to Altamont and Charles Manson. In America, that loss was felt deeply, and the mainstream responded with music that leaned soft, reflective, and healing. It was beautiful, but for those who yearned for something louder, harder, and faster, this new type of music left something to be desired. England and America both handled this transition very differently. In Britain, bands like The Who and The Stones kept charging forward, treating the 60s collapse as a backdrop rather than a defining trauma. In the States, the 27 Club loomed large, as symbolic of a cultural end. This appetite for rebellion and noise still lingered, but it had to retreat underground with bands like the Stooges, the MC5, Suzi Quatro, and the New York Dolls. The Ramones emerged from that underground, taking the loose threads of proto-punk and tying them into something new. When they played England in 1976, they gave the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and the Damned a tangible model to follow. Then when they hit the West Coast, they gave the Germs and Black Flag and the Dead Kennedys and countless others who shaped West Coast hardcore the same inspiration. Even in Washington, D.C., where bands like Bad Brains and Minor Threat would rise, the Ramones' presence was part of that DNA.
Yourselves, are you ever concerned, perhaps, at the lack of success, as opposed to other bands that might have copied you over the years and who seem that much more successful today?
Well, you try not to let that bother you because they are different, and the bands that did succeed are more middle of the road, and a lot of them made compromises along the way to succeed, and that's not what we wanted to do. We believe in trying to succeed at what we're doing, determined to make it the way we are.
No matter the city, no matter the variation, punk's lineage always traced back to these 4 kids from Queens. And that's why the Ramones mattered so much. They represented a moment, a flexing of muscles to make something new and powerful. They may not have invented punk, but without them, punk as we know it would simply not exist. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to pop over to our Patreon account to check out the full documentary about CBGBs. And if you dug the video and you want to see more like it here on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a post. And we'll see you in the next one.